Dr. Stephen Hassan. He is a licensed mental health professional, a cult expert, the author of several books, including The Cult of Trump. He's also the founding director of the Freedom of Mind Resource Center. freedomofmind.com is that website. Cult Expert is his Twitter handle. Dr. Hassan, great having you back on the program. I wanted to talk about your about this story of Ginny Thomas and what she's up to and what she's doing and where she came from. But before I get to that, I had a caller in the last hour who was asking me, how do you see this violence, this Republican violence that is now being promoted literally in multiple Republican television commercials, where they're walking around with guns, or they're saying we're going Antifa hunting and stuff like this. How do you see this playing out? My sense is that it's probably going to get a lot worse before America gets shocked enough that it gets better, sort of like gun violence, like school shootings. But what are you thinking and seeing?
Oh, absolutely. I knew there was going to be violence before January 6th, just from reading the Twitter feeds and such. I actually just published a chapter on online radicalization in a Oxford University textbook on lone actor terrorism. Until we understand what's happening, and I believe we're being, basically psyoped, we're being subjected to psychological warfare, and many people have been radicalized who are now, they were formerly Republicans, but now it's become an organization that appears to just want to refute reality and the truth and promote a revolution, including armed civil war with
Who's
rifles. Directing
this psychological warfare?
Well, in my book, The Cult of Trump, I have a chapter on the puppet masters as I saw them in 2019, and as far as I can tell, it is still very accurate. I had Putin at the top, then I had a cult called The Family, and then I had Opus Dei, and then New Apostolic Reformation, which has tens of millions of Americans who are in these churches, but they're not typical Christian churches. The leaders claim to be apostles or prophets who get direct revelations from God, and they speak in tongues and cast out demons and do faith healings. And they do the BITE model, behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control on people to make them dependent and obedient. And so people are being radicalized online to believe that the current administration and anyone who isn't part of them is evil and needs to be exterminated or repressed.
Right, and we saw how this played out in Nazi Germany. We saw how it played out in Rwanda. We've seen it play out this way around the world. So we've got a couple of people on the Supreme Court. Amy Coney Barrett was a handmaid in a Catholic cult that has been accused of all sorts of weird mind control stuff. In fact, that's where she met her husband. And I think probably more to the point right now in terms of overthrowing the United States government, Ginny Thomas was in a cult. She was in this, what was it, LifeSpring?
LifeSpring.
Yeah, LifeSpring cult. She broke out of that. She became an anti-cult activist. In fact, I think you knew her in that life. And
Yep.
Now it appears that she's bought into another cult. Tell us about that.
So actually, I want to just say I did 3 blogs when Amy Coney Barrett was nominated for the Supreme Court position, and interviewed former members of People of Praise and described it,
which was her cult,
as a covenant community that uses those 4 overlapping components of mind control. It's a very hierarchical thing. Women need to be subjected to their husbands. Her husband is a lawyer. No one asked her about People of Praise during her questioning to be on the Supreme Court, or the fact that in that group she has to tell everything to her husband and get direction from him, according to the group. And regarding Ginny Thomas, I first met her in 1986 in Kansas City at an ex-cult support group meeting. It was part of a larger anti-cult awareness meeting. And we passed around the microphone. People took turns. Everyone knew they were being videotaped. And she talked about the struggle she was having been exited of LifeSpring. But she became an activist and started doing congressional briefings. We were working at the time on Cult Awareness Week in honor of the Jonestown massacre and the assassination of Congressman Ryan. So she actually asked me to do a congressional briefing, which I did. And later, I think it was 1991 or 1992, she introduced me to Clarence Thomas in person at a cult awareness meeting. And she loved my book, Combating Cult Mind Control. And then my understanding is the following year, they converted to Catholicism by Antonin Scalia's son, Father Paul Scalia. And it seems from that point on, they went into a very different arc that got, worse and worse. But it's my opinion, based on the fact that she read my book, liked my work, got radicalized, and is being unduly influenced to believe that actually, Biden lost the election, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm hoping that this questioning at the January 6th committee might bring some daylight in her mind to realize that this really has become another totalist, all or nothing, good versus evil, us versus them, where all of her information is being controlled, at least by her own choosing.
It seems that there's almost like a personality type that, and I frankly, my suspicion is that this is a common denominator for the entire human race. It's the need for tribe. It's the need for family. It's the need for affiliation and association. I think these are, I'm not sure where they are on Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. I guess they'd be the social need, the lowest of the higher needs, that draws people into cults, and that even when people leave cults, they find other groups that are not cults, but provide them with that sense of fraternity, as it were, of fellowship, of support. And so, which raises in fact, I think in our last conversation, I told you one of my probably 10 best friends in the world used to be in one of the Hindu cults here in the United States, Maharaja's cult. And then he became a cult deprogrammer with Ted Patrick, and they were, kidnapping people and deprogramming them. And now he's a Hasidic rabbi, which some would say is a cult. I wouldn't. He wouldn't. But it provides that sense of community. So it seems like the most reasonable way to get people out of cults is to provide them with an alternative where they can still feel a strong sense of belonging, and yet it's not a destructive institution or organization. Does that make sense? And if so, can that guide us when it comes to talking to our parents or siblings or friends who have bought into the Trump cult or this growing violent subset of Republicans who have formed essentially their own cult, like the Texas GOP did just this weekend?
So there's lots to unpack there. I think it's very common that people want to believe there's a common personality type for people who get sucked into authoritarian cults. I'm actually involved with some scientific research to try to call out whether there's any support for that theory. But my experience is that people are situationally vulnerable, like death of a loved one, illness, graduation, divorce, life cycle types things. Of course, we've all been subjected to COVID, pandemic, and economic pressures that make us all susceptible. But the deception that's characteristic of authoritarian cults is critical, where people do not know upfront who they are, what they believe, and what's going to happen to them as they incrementally get more and more involved. So I think the notion that the way to help someone get out of a cult by finding an alternative, less authoritarian cult is actually not what I think is the answer at all. I want to explain to you quickly that there's a difference between helping someone realize the group they're in is bad or is wrong, and explaining social psychology and mind control and sitting with somebody and helping them unpack the many steps and stages and understanding the techniques of manipulation and social influence that can prepare them for not getting recruited into another authoritarian cult. And that was missing for Ginny. She never got that fuller therapy, obviously, that would help her to protect herself. So I think she got lured into that. But I can tell you for sure, a lot of people that I work with were raised in authoritarian families or religious cults, exit, and know that they don't want to be in there, but then they're still looking for that type of certainty. And I'd say certainty is the attractive thing, that confident authority figure voice that says, trust me, I know what God wants.
Right.
And especially for religious people, unless they really do their homework independently and check out the credentials of whoever is claiming to be speaking for God, and remains open to critics and ex-members.
So Stephen, we have about 30 seconds before we're going to hit a break.
Sorry.
I can't control. How should somebody approach a friend or neighbor who's in one of these this Republican cult?
So start warmly, respectfully, and ask questions, but not attacking. Don't try to persuade them. And if you know this person well, just say, hey, I miss you. How are you? Start there. Find common ground. But then just say, I really would like to step into your shoes. Explain how you came to adopt these beliefs. And with Trump, I ask people to tell me their first memory of Trump, and they're almost always negative memories about Trump. And I go, oh, that's interesting. Tell me how you changed. And they will help bring out what the process is that they can then connect the dots.
That's fascinating. Stephen Hassan is the, is a licensed mental health professional. Freedomofmind.com is the website. Cult expert on Twitter. Stephen, thank you.
Yeah, your pleasure. Thanks, Tom.
Dr. Hassan, thank you.